Greetings, fellow Warframe players. Today's topic is Qorvex. Introductions are boring, so let's get straight into the action. So, what can I say about this Warframe? Well, two major things. The first one being that he's incredibly fun. That's for sure. The second thing, however, is that it takes an unreasonable amount of time, or platinum, to make him viable for high-level content. This is probably the wrong way, but I decided to choose the option with time. Please don't repeat my mistakes. Remember, your time costs much more than any amount of platinum in the world. Anyway, let's take a look at the builds that I came up with for Qorvex. It's nothing too original, to be honest. Let's start from the Arcanes. I think every single high-end build for this Warframe uses this Arcane called Universal Fallout. What it does is, it makes enemies affected by 10 radiation procs drop an energy orb with a 60% probability. And believe me, with Qorvex, all the enemies around you will always have 10 radiation procs on them. So this basically gives you infinite energy as long as there are crowds of enemies around you, and as long as you're dealing enough damage. Alright, let's discuss the second Arcane. In my build, I ended up using Arcane Battery. Yes, I know that Primed Flow gives Qorvex more energy than this Arcane if you don't mod for armor. However, I decided to not be greedy and put an Umbra Forma into Qorvex. With it, you can easily fit all three Umbral mods into him, all of which intensify each other. You see, Qorvex has an incredible amount of base armor. In fact, he's the second most armored Warframe after Valkyr. So, I find it natural to embrace his strong sides and use this Arcane on him. Because his ult costs a lot of energy, and for that you need a large energy pool. What's more, a full Umbral build is beneficial for his pillars, as well as the Helminth ability of your choice, and not just his ult. Yes, I'm talking about you, Precision Intensify. Well, Umbral Vitality is basically useless at high levels apart from intensifying the other Umbrals, so you might also want to swap it for something like Energy Conversion. I like it, however, because extra health lets us use our insane armor. Although keep in mind that this approach only makes sense on levels below roughly 300. From there on, if enemies attack you while you're not in your ult or under the effect of rolling guard, they will one-shot you anyway. This is a nice moment to talk about one of the most important mods in this build, Rolling Guard. On higher levels, this is the only thing that saves you from instant death outside your ultimate. Let me demonstrate. The rest of the build is pretty straightforward. Well, maybe not everything is that obvious. You may ask, why are you using Overextended? Don't we want as much power strength as possible? Well, yes, we want that. However, it's pretty easy to obtain power strength from all kinds of sources like Vohm Invocation or from something like the Operator String Strength ability. What you can't obtain through anything but mods, however, is range. And believe me, Qorvex needs range. And believe me, using stretch alone is not quite enough. Another question you may ask could be, why are you using Cunning Drift? Well, it's basically a perfect mod for Qorvex. Not only does it add a tiny bit of range, it also lets him move faster in his ult, because the only parkour movement we're allowed to perform while on ult is dodging. Oh right, I almost forgot about another must-have in this build. It's of course the Fused Crucible Augment that lets us move in the ult. Without it, Qorvex is essentially useless. You know what? Pretty much everything in this build is a must-have. Let us now talk about Qorvex's Helminth options. I am not original in this decision, but in my opinion, Jade's Ophanim Eyes works the best here. Its main advantage is that you don't need to do anything but stare at people for it to strip armor and shields, which is exactly what we need with Qorvex, since we can't really do anything in our ult. Another obvious pick would of course be Rhino's Roar, but that is way too obvious for a Qorvex player. I suppose that if somebody truly enjoys playing as this Warframe, such obvious solutions feel unacceptable to use. I also suppose that an average Qorvex player only listens to music that has never been published on Spotify, and their favorite movie director is probably Ingmar Bergman. Anyway, a less obvious option would be Oberon's Smite, because it synergizes well with Qorvex's passive. Yes, for some reason this gives Smite's projectiles punch through that lets you damage crowds of enemies much more efficiently. However, I found it way too impractical. It is much more convenient to just be in your ult for as long as possible. What's left is to discuss our Archon shard options. I only see 4 kinds of shards being useful on Qorvex. The most obvious, but also the most expensive option, is to install as many Radiation Topaz shards as possible. A cheaper alternative would be Strength Crimson shards. However, this only becomes practical if you don't have any problems with energy. If you struggle with it, install at least either 1 Mini Equilibrium Violet shard or 1 Energy Orb Efficiency Amber shard. If you also need a larger energy pool, I see some sense in using Azure shards, the armor ones if you use Arcane battery, and the energy ones in case you don't. Another little thing I want to show you is that Qorvex is one of the few frames that can easily take full advantage of the secondary Surge Arcane that straight up multiplies your secondary shot's damage by 8 after you cast an ability as long as you have a ton of energy. However, just as a smite Qorvex, it's also very impractical and is only useful for simulacrum fun. Build-wise, that's it for today, but don't leave so quickly. There will be some high-level gameplay where Qorvex microwaves every living thing in his path. By the way, let me know in the comments which frame or weapon or anything you'd like me to touch on in my next video. I'm thinking either about Valkyr, Citrine, or maybe Baruch. To be honest, I don't really know. I have a lot of high-investment builds that I'd like to share. Let me know which ones sound interesting. Alright, here's the promised high-level gameplay footage of Qorvex. By the way, did you know that Qorvex is one of the few warframes that has nothing to do with Valas? He was actually designed by Albrecht himself, so although he might suck in-game, at least his lore is unique. Also, try using Shade with him. It's quite fun. Okay, bye!